Welcome. This is Adam's Scary Stories. Find a quiet room. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. Go ahead. Turn the lights off. Let the darkness be your companion for a little while. Because the stories we're about to share aren't for the light of day. Are you ready, Munch? Good. Let's begin. It was the hour of the night when the city holds its breath. The hands of the clock had dragged themselves past midnight, and time itself seemed to be crawling. I was a 30-year-old man living alone, trying to find some semblance of peace in the small rental house I'd called my sanctuary for the past year. The house was tucked away on the corner of a quiet suburban street, where the silence was broken only by the distant hum of a passing car or the rustle of leaves in the wind. I had made this place my own, grown familiar with its every creak, its every groan. Or so I thought. That night I was in my living room reading a book under the dim glow of a single lamp. Outside, the world was still. Then suddenly the silence was shattered. It wasn't a knock on my front door, it was a series of violent, percussive blows. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was so forceful it felt like someone was trying to break the door down. My heart leaped into my throat. I threw the book aside, my breath catching in my chest. Who could it be at this hour? I moved silently to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The positioning of the porch light was poor, casting long, distorted shadows and obscuring the person's face. All I could see was a frantic silhouette, but the aggression was palpable. The person was relentlessly pounding on the wood. I'm a reasonably fit guy, so more than fear, I felt a surge of anger and confusion. Taking a deep breath, I walked to the door. I unlocked the main deadbolt, but kept the screen door shut and latched. An extra layer of protection. The man standing on my porch was not what I expected. He looked a few years older than me, of average height, with disheveled hair and clothes that seemed to have been slept in for several nights. But more disturbing than his appearance were his eyes. They were wild, darting around with a frantic energy and filled with a raw, unsettling fury. He was breathing heavily, as if he'd been running or was in the throes of a panic attack. Before I could ask what he wanted, he started yelling. "This is my house. Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" His voice was so charged with conviction that I froze for a second. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "I think you have the wrong house. This is my place." "The wrong house?" He let out a laugh, a harsh, grating sound devoid of any humor. "I know this house better than you do. Get out now, or I'm calling the cops." The situation was escalating from bizarre to terrifying. I tried to reason with him, to explain that he was mistaken, but he only grew more agitated. And then, he started saying things that made the ground beneath me feel like it was turning to quicksand. "You think I'm lying," he snarled, his face pressed so close to the screen door I could feel his hot breath. "You see the door to the master bedroom. Notice how poorly it's designed? Every time you open it, it bangs right into the toilet." My blood ran cold. It was true. A tiny, frustrating detail that only someone who had lived here could possibly know. He didn't stop. "And the back door? It always sticks, doesn't it? You have to lift it up slightly while turning the knob to get it open." I stood there, speechless, just staring at him. These weren't things you could observe from the outside. He went on, mentioning other details. The faint dripping sound from the pipe under the kitchen sink, the water stain on the ceiling from a leak during last year's heavy rains. Every single detail was 100% accurate. My mind began to spin. How was this possible? He saw the dawning horror and confusion in my eyes. His wild grin widened. He pulled a worn folder from a tattered messenger bag slung over his shoulder. "Still don't believe me? Look at this." He held up a sheaf of papers against the screen. It was a lease agreement with his name printed in bold letters and a date from 6 months before I had moved in. He had pieces of mail, too, all addressed to him at this address. Everything looked official, though a part of my brain screamed that it had to be fake. But the most chilling moment came when he pulled out his phone. He began swiping through photos. They were pictures taken inside this house. In one, he was sitting on the very couch I had just been on, watching TV. In another, he was cooking in my kitchen. In a third, he was lying in what was now my bed. The photos looked recent, completely legitimate. They weren't obviously photoshopped or staged, and he wasn't alone in them. There were other people, faces I'd never seen before in my life. He tapped on one particular photo. "Look, this one's from last 4th of July. The picture was a selfie taken by a woman I didn't recognize. In it, he, the woman, and a few other people were smiling around my kitchen table. A box of fireworks sat off to the side. The detail, the context, it all looked terrifyingly authentic. In that moment, I genuinely began to question my own memory, my own sanity. My mind reeled. Was it possible I had blocked out memories of sharing the house? Was I the one having some kind of psychological breakdown? It was so surreal my body went cold. I knew for a fact I had been home on the 4th of July, and I had been alone, which made the pictures even more nonsensical. "Look," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I gathered myself. "I don't know what this is, but I'm calling the police. They can sort this out." I wasn't saying it as a threat, but out of sheer desperation. I truly didn't know what else to do. The moment I mentioned the word police, the man's entire demeanor shifted. The wildness in his eyes vanished, replaced by an eerie, cold calm. He took a step back from the door. "Fine," he said, his voice now unnervingly level. "Call them. I'll be waiting outside." And then, he turned and melted into the darkness as if he had never been there. I watched from the window, but I couldn't see where he went. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. I recounted the whole bizarre story. They listened, but their expressions were more weary than concerned. "Sounds like someone on drugs or having a mental episode, sir," one of the officers said. "As long as he's gone, you should be fine. Just carry on." I offered to show them my own lease and ID, but they waved it off. They did a cursory walk around and left. But I wasn't fine. 1,000 questions were swirling in my head. Who was that man? How did he know those intimate details about my house? And above all, the photos. Those photos were a splinter in my mind. The next day, I contacted my landlord, an elderly man who had owned the property his entire life. He listened to my story, as baffled as I was. He swore he had never rented the house to anyone matching the man's description. With his help, I even managed to get in touch with the previous tenants, a couple who had lived here for 3 years before me. They had no idea who I was talking about either. The days bled into weeks. I lived under a constant low-level hum of anxiety. Every creak of the house made my heart pound. I found myself double and triple checking the locks every night. I started to think that maybe it had all been an elaborate failed prank or a scam. Slowly, life began to feel normal again, but the incident remained lodged in the back of my mind like a tumor. And then, exactly 2 weeks later, the night came. I had been out with friends. When I returned late, I saw my front door was slightly ajar. My heart sank. I cautiously pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene before me was a nightmare. My home, my quiet sanctuary, had been utterly ransacked. But this wasn't a typical burglary where thieves grab valuables and run. This was something else, Someone had turned my house upside down as if they were searching for something specific. Books were torn from shelves, couch cushions were slashed open, and the contents of every drawer and closet were strewn across the floor. My bedroom was in the same state of chaos. My clothes, my personal belongings, everything was in disarray. But the strangest part was that my laptop, my TV, and my other valuable electronics were all untouched. Whoever did this wasn't interested in money. They were looking for something else. With shaking hands, I called the police again. This time, they took it more seriously. They found no signs of forced entry, which meant the intruder had used a key. The implication hit me like a physical blow. It was him. It had to be. After that, my landlord immediately had all the locks changed and installed additional security measures. The police investigation went nowhere. Their working theory was that a deranged person genuinely believed he lived in my house and had broken in to look for his belongings. That theory was disturbing enough on its own, but it didn't answer my fundamental questions. How did he get the documents, the photos, and most importantly, a key to my house? I wish I had looked closer at the so-called lease agreement he'd shown me that night. Maybe I could have gotten his name, but in the moment I wasn't thinking clearly. The documents and mail could have been forged, but the photo, I still have no logical explanation for the photos. Were they old pictures with doctored dates? Even if that were the case, it still didn't explain why my landlord, who had owned the house his whole life, didn't recognize him. It's been several months since the break-in. I still live in this house. I don't have the means to just up and move. But it's not a home anymore. It's just four walls where I spend the night. A permanent creeping dread has settled deep inside me. Whenever I'm alone, I get the unshakable feeling that I'm being watched. I feel like there's a secret buried within the walls of this house, in its very silence. Sometimes when I'm trying to sleep, the man's face flashes in my mind. His wild eyes, his cold smile, and his calm, chilling words. I'll be waiting outside. I don't know who he was, what he wanted, or if he'll ever come back. All I know is that the man who pounded on my door that night wasn't just a confused stranger. He was something else, something deeper, more terrifying. He didn't just rob me of my peace of mind, he robbed me of my sense of reality. Now every time I look around my house, a single question echoes in my mind. Is this really my house? Or am I just a temporary character in someone else's story, soon to be evicted? Fear has a smell. It's a stale, musty blend of old air, settled dust, and something else. Something that should have died a long time ago. I learned this the day I finally opened the door to my own attic, a space I had ignored for months. But this story doesn't begin there. It began much earlier and far more quietly, like a poison seeping slowly into the bloodstream. My name is Alex, and for 2 years my wife, Sarah, our 7-year-old daughter, Maya, and I had lived in that house. It was an old, 2-story colonial with all the quirks and charms that come with age. Hardwood floors that groaned with every step, pipes that hummed a low tune in the winter, and a profound silence that deepened after midnight. We had made it our home. We were happy there. Then things started to change. At first, it was just the sounds, faint scuttling noises from overhead deep in the dead of night when the house was asleep. It sounded like the soft, tentative footsteps of a small animal. "Did you hear that?" I'd ask Sarah. She'd murmur back, half asleep. "It's probably just squirrels, Alex. It's an old house." I told myself the same thing. Squirrels, a logical explanation. I bought a few traps and set them near the attic's pull-down access panel located in the hallway of our second floor. Days went by, but the traps remained empty. The sounds, however, continued, sporadic, intermittent, and so faint that I often wondered if I was imagining them. Then the food started disappearing. It was small things at first. An apple left on the kitchen counter, a block of cheese from the fridge, a small portion of leftovers from dinner. Sarah assumed Maya or I had eaten it. I assumed Sarah had forgotten. We'd gently accuse each other, laugh, and move on. But when an entire loaf of bread I had just bought that evening vanished by morning, a genuine knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach for the first time. "Sarah, have you seen the bread?" I asked while making breakfast. She shook her head, her brow furrowed. "No, I didn't even touch it." "That's weird," I said. "I swear I left it right here on the counter." We searched the entire kitchen, but it was gone. We wrote it off as a strange, unexplainable fluke, but it kept happening. Food continued to vanish, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. We joked about putting a lock on the refrigerator, but the idea felt so absurd in our own home that we dismissed it. Maya started saying strange things too. "Daddy," she'd say, "someone whispers in my room at night." I'd stroke her hair. "It's just the wind, sweetie." But one night she woke me up, her eyes wide with terror. "Daddy, the man upstairs is walking again." "What man, honey?" I asked, groggy with sleep. "The one who hides in the walls," she whispered. A cold dread washed over me. Kids have imaginary friends, but hers sounded like a monster from a nightmare. I searched her room, checked the closets, looked under the bed. Nothing. I reassured her it was just a bad dream and let her sleep in our room with us. Nearly 6 months passed like this. Our lives were now underscored by a subtle, persistent tension. We had grown accustomed to the noises and the missing food, normalizing the bizarre, but a fear was incubating in the dark corners of our minds. An unspoken, unseen dread. We called an exterminator who inspected the entire house and found no signs of rodents or any other infestation. His report only amplified our unease. Then came the day. It was a Sunday. The weak winter sun was filtering through the windows. I decided it was finally time to clear out some of the old junk stored in the attic. It was a place we rarely went, a dusty graveyard of old furniture, forgotten boxes, and memories we no longer needed. I pulled the folding ladder down from the hallway ceiling and pushed open the small, square attic door. As it swung upward, a peculiar smell wafted down. The same smell I mentioned. Stale air, thick dust, and the faint, sickly sweet scent of decay. I wrinkled my nose. "Smells like an animal died up there," I called down to Sarah, who was standing at the bottom of the ladder. I switched on my flashlight and began to climb. The attic was plunged in near total darkness, save for a single, small porthole window that cast a weak circle of light on the far wall. The flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a world coated in a thick blanket of gray dust. Old couches, boxes of books, Maya's infant toys. I took a few steps in, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The smell was stronger here. I swept the flashlight beam across the space, hoping to find a dead squirrel or bird. My light fell upon a corner of the attic, mostly hidden behind a stack of large, imposing boxes. There was something there, something that didn't belong. It was a nest, not a nest for an animal. It was a crude bed, a pile of old blankets and discarded pillows, clearly arranged as a place for someone to sleep. Next to it, on the dusty floor, were empty food cans, water bottles, and the wrappers from the loaves of bread that had vanished from our kitchen. My heart began to hammer against my ribs so hard I could hear it in my ears. My brain struggled to process what I was seeing. This wasn't the work of an animal. This was a human dwelling. My hand holding the flashlight began to tremble. I aimed the beam directly at the pile of blankets. And then I saw it. A slight movement from within the heap. Slowly, deliberately, a human form began to emerge. A man, perhaps in his late 40s or 50s, dressed in filthy, tattered clothes, sat up from within the nest of blankets. His hair was long and matted. His beard was overgrown, and his eyes His eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, reflecting the light from my flashlight like a nocturnal predator. We stared at each other, frozen in a moment that felt suspended outside of time. 1,000 thoughts screamed through my mind at once. Who is he? How long has he been here? The noises, the food, Maya's whispers. It all coalesced into a single horrifying image. This man wasn't just in my house. He was living with my family right above our heads in the shadow of our ignorance. He said nothing. He just stared, his eyes showing no fear, no surprise. Just a flat, hollow emptiness, as if I were the intruder who had disturbed his peace. I wanted to scream, but the sound was trapped in my throat. I took an involuntary step backward. A floorboard creaked loudly under my foot, and the sound shattered the spell. The man moved. He rose with a feral quickness that defied his gaunt frame and lunged toward me. A guttural, inhuman growl tore from his throat. I spun around and scrambled for the ladder in a blind panic. I had never moved so fast in my life. I could hear his footsteps thudding on the floorboards right behind me. I practically fell down the ladder, and the moment my feet hit the hallway floor, I shoved it back up. I slammed the attic door shut and fumbled with the latch, locking it into place. "Alex! What is it? What happened?" Sarah screamed, her face a mask of terror. "Call 911!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Now! There's someone in the house!" As the words left my mouth, a violent banging erupted from the attic door above us. Boom! 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 He was trying to get out. He was pounding on the door, and I could hear the sickening splintering of wood. Maya ran down the stairs crying and clung to Sarah's legs. Sarah dialed 911 with trembling hands. I grabbed the heaviest piece of furniture I could move, an old wooden dresser, and dragged it directly under the attic hatch. The pounding from above grew more frantic, more violent. I was sure he was going to break through at any second. Those few minutes felt like an eternity. When the distant wail of police sirens grew closer, I felt a wave of relief so profound my knees almost buckled. Suddenly, the banging from the attic stopped. When the officers entered, I explained everything in a shaking, breathless voice. Two of them, guns drawn, cautiously made their way upstairs. Sarah and I waited below, holding our breath. After a few moments of tense silence, one of the officers called down, "It's clear there's no one up here." Sarah and I looked at each other. Impossible. I went up with them. The attic door was splintered and damaged, but the man was gone. His nest, the empty food containers, it was all still there. But he had vanished. One of the officers pointed to the small round window. The glass was shattered. "Looks like he broke out through here," the officer said. "Probably got onto the roof and climbed down a tree or onto your neighbor's roof." We didn't sleep in the house that night. We couldn't. We checked into a hotel. The police conducted their investigation, but the man was never found. No fingerprints, no identification. He was a ghost who had haunted our home and then dissolved into thin air. We sold the house immediately. We moved into a new modern apartment building. No attic, no basement, no dark places to hide. But is any place truly safe? It's been a year since that day. We've tried to piece our lives back together, but the fear is a permanent resident now. I still wake up at night to check the locks. Sarah still jumps at the slightest sound. And Maya is now terrified of the dark. She says she can still hear the whispers sometimes. I often think about him. Who was he? How long had he been living with us? Did he watch us sleep? Did he walk past us in the hallways when we were gone? The thought gnaws at my sanity. We were living our lives and he was living a parallel life, right above our heads, a silent, patient observer. The most terrifying part isn't that someone broke into our home. The most terrifying part is that he was already there. We had broken into his, and he never asked us to leave. He just watched and waited. For what? I'll never know. And that is the fear that keeps me awake at night. The knowledge of how fragile the illusion of safety is, how thin the walls of your home truly are, and how you are never, ever truly alone. You never really sleep the same way again after you have a child. It's a truth no one tells you, not really. You learn to exist in a state of semi-awareness, your senses tuned to the slightest cough, whimper, or shift in breathing. Your brain is always on, always listening. But on that night, my wife Jenna and I were deeply, blissfully asleep. It was the first time in months that our 6-month-old son Leo had slept for more than a few hours straight. We should have been grateful for the silence. Instead, that silence was the prelude to a storm. It was around 2 a.m. when I shifted in bed, my eyes fluttering open. On the nightstand beside me, the small screen of the baby monitor glowed softly. It was our window into Leo's world, our connection to his room just across the hall. Normally, the grainy black and white image showed nothing but the peaceful rise and fall of our son's chest. But that night, there was something else on the screen. At first, my sleep-addled mind refused to process it. I blinked, assuming it was a shadow, a trick of the infrared light. But it wasn't a shadow, it was a figure. Tall, thin, and perfectly still. A man was standing next to Leo's crib, his head bowed as if in prayer, looking down at our sleeping child. An icy wave of adrenaline surged through me. My breath caught in my throat. I jabbed my elbow into Jenna's side, hard enough to make her jolt awake. "What is it?" she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. I couldn't speak. I just pointed a trembling finger at the monitor. Jenna's eyes focused on the screen. A choked gasp escaped her lips, a sound she instantly smothered with her hand. Her eyes widened in pure, undiluted terror. We were both frozen, holding our breath, staring at the screen. The man was there, inches from our son. He wasn't moving. He was just watching. His stillness was the most terrifying part. It wasn't the frantic energy of a burglar. It was something else, something far more sinister. My mind raced, a chaotic flood of questions. Who is he? How did he get in? We had locked the doors. The windows were all latched. Was this a dream? A shared, waking nightmare? "The police," Jenna whispered, her voice shaking. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My hands were trembling so violently it took me several attempts to dial 911. I pressed the phone to my ear and spoke in a hushed, strangled voice to the operator. "There's someone in my house. He's in my baby's room. Please, you have to hurry." The operator, calm and professional, told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. "Sir, are you in a safe location?" she asked. "Safe?" Our son was in that room with the stranger, and we were here, watching helplessly on a tiny screen. "We have to do something," Jenna pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We can't just wait." The father in me, the protector, was screaming to charge in there, to confront this man, to save my son. But the fear was paralyzing. The man was so calm, too calm. If I startled him, what would he do? The thought of him harming Leo was unbearable. "No," I decided, my voice a strained whisper. "We wait for the police. If we spook him..." I couldn't finish the sentence. Our eyes were glued to the monitor. Every second stretched into an eternity. The figure remained motionless, a statue carved from shadow. Then he raised his hand slowly, deliberately, and reached toward Leo's head. "No." Jenna's cry was a muffled sob, but he didn't touch him. His hand hovered in the air just inches above our son's head, as if feeling his warmth. Then, just as slowly, he lowered it back to his side. Suddenly, he lifted his head and looked directly at the camera. Though the image was grainy and the room was dark, we could see his face. It was blank, devoid of any emotion. No anger, no malice. Just an empty, impassive stare. His eyes were two black voids that seemed to look right through the screen, right into our souls. He knew. He knew we were watching. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if in acknowledgement. And then he took a single step backward, disappearing into the part of the room the camera couldn't see. He was gone. We kept staring at the screen, praying he wouldn't reappear. A few minutes later, we heard the faint sound of police cruisers pulling up outside. I ran downstairs and threw the door open. 2 officers rushed in. "He's upstairs in my son's room," I gasped. The officers, guns drawn, moved swiftly up the stairs. Jenna and I followed close behind. They pushed open the door to Leo's room and swept inside. The room was empty. Leo was sleeping peacefully in his crib, oblivious to the world. The officers searched everywhere, the closet, under the crib, every possible hiding spot. Nothing. The man wasn't there. Maybe he ran, one of the officers suggested. They searched the entire house, room by room, closet by closet. They found nothing. Then came the most unsettling discovery of all. "There are no signs of forced entry, sir," the other officer reported. "All the doors and windows are locked from the inside." "But that's impossible," I yelled. "We saw him. He was right here." I showed them the footage on the monitor. They stared at the screen, their professional composure cracking into expressions of confusion and alarm. The image was undeniable. A stranger had been standing over our son. The police filed their report and assured us they would patrol the area. But they were as baffled as we were. When they left, a silence descended upon the house, a silence far more terrifying than any noise. After that night, our home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a place where every shadow held a threat and every sound was a potential intrusion. We immediately changed all the locks. We installed a state-of-the-art security system with sensors on every window and door. We moved Leo's crib into our own room, but these measures did little to quell the deep-seated fear. How did he get in? And more importantly, what did he want? He hadn't harmed Leo. He hadn't stolen anything. He just came, watched, and vanished. The lack of motive was the most terrifying part of all. Months passed. Slowly, painstakingly, life attempted to return to normal. We convinced ourselves it was a singular, inexplicable event that would never happen again. We tried to bury the memory in the darkest corner of our minds, but some things refused to stay buried. Almost a year later, on Leo's 2nd birthday, we threw a small party. Friends and family filled our home with laughter and joy. For that one day, for a few precious hours, I felt like we were finally free from the shadow of that night. That evening, after all the guests had left, Jenna and I sat exhausted on the couch while Leo played with his new toys. Jenna was scrolling through the pictures from the party on her phone. "Look at this one," she said, smiling, and showed me a photo of Leo blowing out his birthday candles, with all of us gathered behind him. I smiled back. Then my eyes drifted to the background of the photo. Outside the living room window, in the reflection of the dark glass, was a face, a pale, blurry face pressed against the window, looking in, the same empty, impassive eyes. My blood turned to ice. I snatched the phone from Jenna's hand and zoomed in. There was no doubt. It was him. He had been there during the party, watching us. "Jenna," I could barely get the word out. She saw it, and the color drained from her face. We looked at each other, and that old, cold fear came rushing back, flooding our veins. He hadn't left. He had been there all along, watching. That was the breaking point. We couldn't live in that house another day. We put it on the market and moved to an apartment on the other side of the city in a high-rise building with 24-hour security. Today, Leo is 5. He's a happy, healthy kid who knows nothing about that night. We've never told him, but the fear is still with us. It's a part of our marriage, a part of our lives. I often think about that man. Who was he? A ghost or a man of flesh and blood whose motives were beyond our comprehension? How did he get in? Did he have a key? Did he know some hidden passage within the walls of that old house? Or was the explanation something not of this world? I have no answers. And perhaps that's the most terrifying part. The horror of the unknown. The knowledge that there is a crack in the foundation of your world. A gap through which anything can slip. Sometimes when I watch Leo sleep at night, I see the image from the baby monitor in my mind. The still figure and the empty eyes staring right back at me. And I realize that he wasn't just watching our son that night. He was watching us. He saw our vulnerability, our fear, our helplessness, and I think for him, maybe that was enough. Maybe all he wanted was to know that he could watch, and that we would know he was watching. My obsession with security cameras began, as most obsessions do, with a lie. I told my wife, Emily, that I was installing them for peace of mind. A deterrent for the package thieves that had become more common in our quiet, leafy suburb. It was a plausible excuse. But the truth was darker, rooted in a primal, unspoken anxiety that had taken root in me over the years. I've always been a light sleeper, a man who hears every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the house settling. I needed to see the silence. I needed proof that the things I heard in the dead of night were just the house breathing and not something else. So I bought a top-of-the-line system, 4 high-definition night vision cameras covering every angle of our 2-story home. The front porch, the back deck, the driveway, and the narrow, tree-shrouded path on the side of the house. I spent a whole Saturday mounting them, running the wires and linking them to a dedicated hard drive in my home office. That first night, I felt a profound, almost intoxicating sense of control. I could lie in bed, pull up the live feed on my phone and see my fortress, secure and silent under the ghostly green glow of the infrared. For the first time in a long time, I slept soundly. The first week was blissfully boring. I'd skim through the motion-activated recordings each morning over coffee. The clips were mundane. A stray cat darting across the lawn at 2:14 a.m., a raccoon meticulously investigating our trash cans, the newspaper delivery guy making his pre-dawn rounds. Each clip was a small, reassuring confirmation that the world outside my walls was exactly as it should be. The system was working. My anxiety began to recede. The lie I told myself was that I was over it. It was on the morning of the 8th day that I saw him. The notification on my phone read, "Motion detected. Side yard, 3:03 a.m." I tapped on it, expecting to see the familiar raccoon. The clip began. For the first 10 seconds, there was nothing but the gentle sway of the maple tree's branches. Then a figure stepped into the frame from the deep shadows of the property line. He was a man, or at least the shape of one. He was dressed in dark, formless clothing, his face obscured by a hoodie and the poor angle. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was unnerving. He wasn't a thief in a hurry. He was an explorer. He walked directly to the side window of our living room. He didn't try to smash it. He didn't try to pry it open. He simply placed his gloved hands on the frame and pushed gently at first, then with more force. A silent, methodical test. The window, locked from the inside, didn't budge. He paused, then moved to the next window, the one to my office. He repeated the process. A gentle push, then a firm one. Nothing. My coffee went cold in my hands. I watched, my heart beginning a slow, heavy drum against my ribs as he made his way around the entire perimeter of the house. Just outside the camera's main fields of view, but always reappearing. He tested the backsliding door, his silhouette a dark stain against the glass. He tested the kitchen window. He even tested the small, high window in the downstairs bathroom. Finally, he appeared on the front porch camera. He walked up the steps without a sound and approached the front door. He didn't touch the knob. Instead, he placed his hand flat against the center of the door, as if feeling for a heartbeat. He stood there for a full minute, perfectly still, before turning and walking calmly down the steps and disappearing into the street's darkness. The clip ended. The timestamp read 3:28 a.m. He had been there for 25 minutes. I didn't show the footage to Emily. How could I? How could I explain that a stranger had spent half an hour methodically testing every single entry point to our home while we slept, oblivious, just feet away? It would shatter the illusion of safety she lived in, the illusion I had so desperately wanted for myself. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a drunk, a lost soul, a random act of weirdness. But the next morning there was another notification. Motion detected. Side yard, 3:03 a.m. It was him. The same dark clothing, the same slow, deliberate movements, the same methodical testing of every window, every door. He followed the exact same path. He pushed on the same spots. He finished once again by placing his hand on our front door before melting back into the night. This time he stayed for 27 minutes. And so it began. Every single night between 3:00 and 3:30 a.m. he would arrive. He never deviated from his path. He never escalated his attempts. He never broke a window or tried to pick a lock. He just tested, pushed, checked. It was a ritual, a patient, terrifying pilgrimage around the shell of our lives. I became a ghost in my own home. My days were a fog of exhaustion, my nights a torment of sleepless vigilance. I stopped sleeping in my bed with Emily. I told her I had a big project at work and needed to stay up late. I'd sit in the dark of my office, the 4 camera feeds glowing on my monitor, and I would wait for him. At 3:03 a.m. he would appear. I would watch him, my body rigid with a mixture of fear and a strange, intimate familiarity. I began to learn his movements, the slight tilt of his head as he examined a lock, the way he'd pause at the back deck as if listening. He was no longer just an intruder. He was my nightly visitor, the star of a private horror movie only I was watching. Why didn't I call the police? I asked myself that 1,000 times. What would I tell them? That a man was touching my house? He wasn't breaking any laws. He wasn't trespassing in a way they could prosecute. He was on the walkway, the porch, publicly accessible areas. I could imagine their weary dismissal. "Sir, we can't arrest someone for pushing on a window." I would be the crazy guy obsessed with his security cameras. My obsession deepened. I upgraded the cameras, adding microphones. The next night, I not only saw him, I heard him. I heard the soft scuff of his shoes on the flagstone path. I heard the faint thump as his gloved hand made contact with the glass. And I heard his breathing, a low, steady, almost meditative sound. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated patience. One night, as he stood at the back sliding door, he did something different. He leaned in close to the glass, his breath fogging a small circle on the pane. And he whispered. The microphone was sensitive enough to pick it up, a faint raspy sound. "I know you're in there," he said. "It's a nice house, a good strong house." I recoiled from the monitor as if I'd been slapped. He wasn't just testing the house, he was talking to it. Or maybe he was talking to me. Did he know about the cameras? Was this all a performance? The paranoia began to consume me. I started seeing him everywhere. A man in a dark hoodie at the grocery store. A shadowy figure across the street when I took out the trash. The world was closing in. My work suffered. I was irritable and distant with Emily, who was growing increasingly worried about my late nights and gaunt appearance. "Alex, what is going on?" She finally confronted me one evening. "You're not here, even when you're here. You're like a ghost. Are you sick?" I couldn't hold it in any longer. The secret was a poison and it was killing me. I took her into my office and with a shaking hand I played the footage. I made her watch it all. The first night, the second, the night he whispered. I watched her face transform from confusion to disbelief and then to the same cold, primal fear that had been my constant companion for weeks. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, her hand over her mouth, her eyes fixed on the screen where the silent man was completing his nightly ritual. When it was over, she turned to me, her voice a barely audible whisper. "We have to call the police now." This time I agreed. The two officers who responded were young, and I could see the skepticism in their eyes as I explained the situation. But then I showed them the footage, the whispering, the methodical nightly routine. Their expressions hardened. This wasn't a random drunk. This was predatory behavior. "He's been doing this for over a month?" one of them asked, his tone now serious. "Yes," I said, "every single night." They took a copy of the hard drive. They promised to set up a patrol car in an unmarked vehicle down the street. For the first time, I felt a sliver of hope. It was no longer my secret to carry alone. That night, I sat in my office, not with fear, but with a tense anticipation. I watched the feeds. The street was quiet. 3 a.m. came and went. 3:15, 3:30, nothing. He didn't show up. For the first time in over a month, he broke his routine. The same thing happened the next night and the night after. The police kept their patrol there for a week, but our visitor never appeared. It was as if he had known, as if he had sensed the change in the air and had simply vanished. The police eventually closed the case. "Without a suspect or any new activity, there's nothing we can do," the detective told me over the phone. "Maybe you scared him off." Did we? Or was this just another part of his game? We tried to move on. We put up floodlights, reinforced the locks, and installed a monitored alarm system. But these were just physical barriers. The psychological walls had already been breached. The house no longer felt like a sanctuary, it felt like a stage. Emily couldn't sleep in the house anymore. The silence she used to cherish now felt heavy with a silent, watching presence. Every creak of the floorboards was him. Every gust of wind against the window was his hand, testing, pushing. We sold the house 6 months later at a loss. We moved to a high-rise apartment in the city, a sterile box of glass and steel 20 floors up with a doorman and keycard access. There are no dark yards here, no shadowy paths. But I still feel his presence. It's been 2 years. I still have the original hard drive. Sometimes, late at night when Emily is asleep, I plug it in. I watch him. I watch his silent, patient dance around a house that is no longer mine. I listen to his whispered words. "I know you're in there." I don't know who he was. I don't know what he wanted. Maybe he was a former resident. Maybe he was a madman who had chosen our house at random. Or maybe he was something worse, a person who derives pleasure not from breaking in, but from the slow, methodical erosion of another person's sanity. He didn't need to get inside the house. He had already gotten inside my head. And that's where he lives now. He is the reason I wake up at 3:03 a.m., my heart pounding. He is the face I see in the reflection of a dark window. He taught me that the most terrifying intruder isn't the one who breaks down your door. It's the one who stands outside, patiently, night after night, proving that your locks, your walls, and your sense of safety are nothing but a fragile illusion, waiting to be tested. There's a unique vulnerability that comes with living alone. You become the sole guardian of your sanctuary, the only one who knows its rhythms, its sounds, its secrets. You learn the language of the house, the groan of the water pipes, the sigh of the floorboards, the way the wind whispers through the old window frames. For 3 years in my small one-bedroom apartment, I had been the only one listening. I thought I knew every sound. I was wrong. My story, my nightmare, began with something as mundane as a leaking faucet in the bathroom. A persistent, maddening drip. 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 That echoed in the dead of night, a tiny flaw in the otherwise perfect silence of my world. After a week of trying to ignore it, I finally gave in and called a plumbing service my landlord recommended. The man who arrived the next afternoon was named Frank. He was unremarkable in every way. Middle-aged, with a tired face, a soft paunch, and hands that were calloused and stained from years of work. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice, barely making eye contact. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, yet there was a stillness, a heavy quietness to his presence that made me vaguely uncomfortable. I chalked it up to the natural awkwardness of having a stranger in my personal space. He worked for about an hour. I stayed in the living room trying to distract myself with a book, but I was acutely aware of his movements in the bathroom, the clanking of metal tools, the grunt of effort, the sudden rush of water. When he was finished, he came out, wiped his hands on a dirty rag, and mumbled, "All fixed." I paid him in cash. He wrote out a receipt, and I walked him to the door. "Thank you, Frank," I said, forcing a polite smile. He just nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor, and then he was gone. I locked the deadbolt behind him, the familiar click. A sound of restored privacy and security. The dripping had stopped. The silence was perfect again. Or so I believed. The feeling started that very evening. It was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you feel you're being watched. I was making dinner in the kitchen, and I had the sudden, irrational urge to look over my shoulder. The apartment was empty, of course. I shook my head, blaming it on an overactive imagination. "You're just on edge from having a stranger here," I told myself. But the feeling didn't go away. It followed me. When I watched TV on the couch, I felt a presence in the short hallway behind me. When I lay in bed, I felt as if eyes were on me from the darkness of my open bedroom door. I started closing it at night, something I hadn't done in years. The sounds began a few days later. They were tiny, almost imperceptible noises that didn't belong to the house's usual symphony. A soft creak from the floorboards in the hallway when I was certain I was still. A faint, almost inaudible thump from the direction of the bathroom long after I'd turned off the lights. I'd freeze, my heart pounding, straining to hear it again. But there would only be silence. I told myself it was the pipes settling, the building shifting. I was becoming paranoid. I had to be. One night, about a week after the plumber's visit, I came home late from work, exhausted. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and kicked off my shoes. The apartment was cold and dark. As I walked toward the bedroom, I noticed something odd. The bathroom door, which I always left wide open to air out the small space, was closed. I stopped, my hand hovering over the light switch in the hall. I never closed that door. Ever. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. A draft? Did I close it this morning without thinking? No, I was certain I hadn't. My heart hammering, I slowly reached out and pushed the door open. I flipped on the light. The bathroom was empty. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The towel hanging on the rack, my toothbrush in its holder, the shower curtain pulled neatly to one side. I let out a shaky breath, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. I was losing my mind. I was seeing patterns that weren't there, creating a monster out of thin air. But as I turned to leave, my eyes caught something on the floor. A single, dark, greasy smudge near the base of the toilet, almost hidden in the shadow. It looked like it had been made by the sole of a heavy work boot. I stared at it, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I hadn't worn boots in my bathroom. Frank had. but he had been gone for a week. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had missed it when I cleaned. Maybe it had been there all along. I scrubbed the smudge away with a paper towel until there was no trace of it left, as if erasing it could erase the fear it had ignited. The next few days were a blur of anxiety. I became obsessed. I started leaving tiny invisible traps around the apartment before I left for work. A single strand of my hair taped across my bedroom doorframe. The salt shaker on the kitchen counter turned at a specific angle. A book on my nightstand left open to a particular page. Every evening I would return home and perform a frantic ritualistic check. For a few days, everything was untouched. I started to relax, to believe that I had truly been on the edge of a breakdown. The traps were a silly, paranoid game. Then on a Friday, I came home and my blood ran cold. The strand of hair on my bedroom door was broken. I stood frozen in the hallway, my keys digging into my palm. Someone had been in my bedroom. I did a slow, terrifying sweep of the apartment. Nothing seemed out of place. My laptop was on the desk, my jewelry in its box. Nothing was stolen. But the broken hair was undeniable proof. My sanctuary had been breached. I didn't call the police. What would I tell them? That a single hair was out of place? They would think I was crazy. I felt crazy. Instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I bought a small, cheap nanny cam and hid it on the bookshelf in my living room, its tiny lens pointed toward the main hallway that connected the living room, bedroom, and bathroom. The next day at work was torture. I couldn't focus. I kept checking my phone, watching the live feed, but the apartment remained still and empty. When I got home, I immediately retrieved the camera and plugged it into my laptop, my hands shaking as I fast-forwarded through the day's recording. The footage was hours of silent, empty rooms. Nothing. I felt a wave of foolishness wash over me. Of course, there was nothing. The hair must have broken on its own. The smudge was old. The closed door was a draft. It was all in my head. I was about to close the file when I decided to check the nighttime footage from the night before. I scrolled back to the hours after I had gone to bed. 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. The apartment was dark and silent, and then at 3:17 a.m. I saw it. Movement. From the deep shadow of the bathroom doorway, a figure emerged. It moved with an agonizing slowness, a creature of the dark. It crept down the hallway, a tall, bulky silhouette against the faint moonlight from the living room window. It stopped outside my closed bedroom door and just stood there, listening for what felt like an eternity. Then it slowly, silently retreated back into the blackness of the bathroom. I slammed my laptop shut, a strangled cry escaping my lips. It was real. It was all real. Someone was in my apartment. Someone was coming out of my bathroom at night. My mind went back to the plumber, Frank, the closed door, the greasy smudge. It couldn't be. It was insane. How could he still be here? Where could he possibly hide in a one-bedroom apartment? The bathroom. The thought was so absurd, so impossible that I almost dismissed it. But the image from the camera was burned into my mind. The figure had emerged from the bathroom. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my couch in the dark, my phone in my hand, watching the live feed from the camera. I had a heavy kitchen knife on the cushion beside me. The hours ticked by. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At 3:17 a.m. on schedule, the shadow detached itself from the bathroom doorway. I watched on the tiny screen as the figure crept into the hall. This time, it didn't stop at my bedroom door. It turned and moved toward the living room, toward me. My breath hitched. I flattened myself against the couch, trying to disappear into the cushions, my knuckles white as I gripped the knife. The floorboards groaned softly. He was getting closer. I could hear his breathing now, a low, raspy sound that filled the silence. He stopped at the edge of the living room, just out of my line of sight. but I could see his shadow stretching across the floor. A long, dark predator. He stood there for a full minute and then he retreated, melting back into the bathroom as silently as he had come. He was toying with me. He knew I was awake. He knew I was watching. The next day, I didn't go to work. I knew what I had to do. The police wouldn't believe me without definitive proof. I had to confront the source of this nightmare myself. I waited until dusk, when the fading light gave the apartment a gray, spectral quality. I took the heaviest lamp from my living room, a solid metal base that felt reassuringly heavy in my hands. I walked to the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was empty, bathed in the gloomy twilight. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I looked at the shower. The cheap plastic curtain was pulled almost completely shut, leaving only a small gap. It was a solid, opaque white, blocking any view of what was behind it. "I know you're in there," I said, my voice a broken whisper. Silence. "Come out," I said, louder this time, trying to inject a confidence I didn't feel. The only reply was the sound of my own ragged breathing. I knew he was behind it. I could feel him. The air was thick with his presence. This had to end. Now. With a scream that was more terror than rage, I lunged forward and ripped the shower curtain open, and my world fell apart. He was there. Frank, the plumber. He was crouched in the bathtub, his knees pulled up to his chest. He was thinner than I remembered, his face gaunt, his eyes wide and hollow in the dim light. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at a small, crudely made hole in the wall behind the shower head. A hole that led into the dark, forgotten space of the building's plumbing and ventilation shafts. That was his door, his way in and out. He looked at me then, a slow, tired turn of his head. There was no malice in his eyes, no anger, just a profound, bone-deep weariness and something else. A flicker of what looked like fear. He was afraid of me. He didn't attack, he didn't speak, he just scrambled with a desperate, clumsy haste into the hole in the wall and was gone. I was left standing in my bathroom, staring at the dark, gaping wound in my wall. The shower curtain clutched in my fist. The police came. This time they believed me. The hole in the wall was proof enough. They searched the building's crawl spaces and shafts, but they never found him. He had vanished as completely as a ghost. The building management sealed the wall, but they couldn't seal the hole he had left in my mind. I moved out the next week. I couldn't stay. I couldn't shower without picturing his face. I couldn't sleep without hearing his phantom footsteps. It's been years, but I still think about him. I don't think he wanted to hurt me. I don't think he wanted to steal anything. I think he was just a man who had lost his place in the world and had found a new one in the dark, forgotten spaces between the walls. My apartment wasn't a target, it was just an anchor, a place to silently observe a life that wasn't his. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying. The knowledge that for weeks a man lived a secret, parallel life in my home. He ate my food. He watched me sleep. He listened to my private conversations. He was a silent, invisible parasite feeding on my existence. The most horrifying part is that he wasn't a monster who broke down my door. He was a quiet man I had let in myself, who had simply decided not to leave. And he had built his home in the one place I never thought to look, right behind me. There's a certain kind of silence that only comes after midnight in a house you've lived in your whole life. It's a comfortable silence, filled with familiar sounds, the low hum of the refrigerator, the groan of the house settling, the distant rumble of a late-night train. These were the sounds of my childhood, the lullaby of my suburban home. I was 20 years old, home from college for the summer, back in the same ground floor bedroom I'd had since I was a little girl. Its two large windows, one facing the quiet street, the other looking out onto the dark tree-lined side yard, were my portals to the world. I had always felt safe here. That was my first mistake. The tapping started on a Tuesday night. It was so faint at first, I thought I was dreaming it. Tap, tap, tap. A tiny rhythmic sound, like a bird's beak against glass. I was drifting in that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep, and the sound wove itself into my dreams. I rolled over, pulling the covers tighter around me, and sank back into oblivion. The next night, it came again. This time I was fully awake, reading a book under the soft glow of my bedside lamp. The house was still, my parents already asleep upstairs. Tap, tap, tap. It was clearer this time, coming from the window that faced the side yard. I froze, my eyes lifting from the page. My heart gave a little flutter. It was probably just a branch from the old oak tree brushing against the glass in the wind. I listened. There was no wind. I told myself it was a moth or some other night insect drawn to the light from my lamp. I tried to ignore it, to lose myself in my book again, but the sound was insistent. Tap, tap, tap. It had a rhythm, a deliberate quality that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't random. It felt like a signal. I turned off my lamp, plunging the room into darkness. If it was a moth, the darkness would make it go away. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling and listening. For a long time, there was only silence. I let out a slow, shaky breath. See? Nothing. Just my imagination running wild. I was about to roll over and go to sleep when the sound came again, this time louder, more defined. Tap, tap, tap. It was right next to my head, just on the other side of the wall and the glass. My breath caught in my throat. That wasn't a branch. That wasn't an insect. That was a fingernail. Someone was tapping on my window. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A neighborhood kid playing a prank? A drunk who had wandered into our yard? But the methodical patience of it felt wrong. It felt predatory. I lay there, paralyzed by a fear so pure and cold it was like ice in my veins. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just listened. After what felt like an eternity, the tapping stopped. I remained awake for hours, staring into the darkness until the first gray light of dawn crept into my room. I didn't tell my parents. How could I? They would either dismiss it as my imagination or overreact, turning our home into a fortress and my summer into a prison. I convinced myself it was a one-time event, a bizarre but harmless prank. The third night was quiet. I lay awake until almost 3 a.m. listening, but there was nothing. A wave of relief washed over me. It was over. I had been silly to be so scared. It was the fourth night that broke me. I was in a deep sleep when the sound tore me from a dream. It wasn't the gentle tapping from before, it was a scratching sound, a slow, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape against the glass. It was the sound of a fingernail being dragged slowly, deliberately across the pane. It was a sound designed to crawl under your skin, to fray your nerves, to let you know that someone was outside and they were patient. I sat bolt upright in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, thick with anticipation. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to see. I had to know what was out there. My body moved as if in a trance. I slipped out of bed, my feet cold on the hardwood floor. I crept toward the window, my movement slow and agonizing as if wading through thick mud. My hand, trembling, reached for the edge of the curtain. I told myself it would be nothing. A branch. The wind. My own fear staring back at me. I took a deep breath, held it, and pulled the curtain back. Nothing. The side yard was empty, bathed in the pale, ethereal glow of a half-moon. The old oak tree stood silent and still. There were no pranksters, no drunks. There was nothing. I let out my breath in a rush, a shaky laugh bubbling up in my throat. I was going crazy. I had worked myself into such a state that I was hallucinating sounds. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, my body limp with relief. I closed my eyes for just a second. That's when I heard the whisper, a soft, breathy sound that seemed to come from right beside my ear. "Found you." My eyes snapped open and my world ended. Pressed against the other side of the glass, so close that his breath was fogging a small circle on the pane, was a face. It was a man's face, pale and gaunt in the moonlight. But it was his expression that shattered my sanity. He was smiling, a wide, unnatural, predatory grin that stretched his lips too far, showing too many teeth. His eyes were wide, black, and utterly devoid of any human emotion except for a terrifying, triumphant glee. It was the face of a monster that had finally cornered its prey. I didn't scream. The sound was stolen from my lungs. I was paralyzed, trapped in his gaze. We stared at each other through the thin pane of glass, two beings from different worlds separated by a few millimeters of silica. His smile never wavered. He raised a hand slowly and pressed his palm flat against the glass, directly, opposite my face. His fingers were long and spider-like. Then he tapped. Tap, tap, tap. Right against the glass, his eyes locked on mine, his grin widening with each deliberate impact. The spell broke. A raw, primal scream tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, falling over my own feet, and scrambled away, crab-walking across the floor until my back hit the opposite wall. I never took my eyes off the window. He was still there, his face pressed against the glass, his smile a permanent, horrifying fixture. He didn't seem startled by my scream. He seemed to enjoy it. My scream finally brought my father crashing into the room. "Claire, what is it? What's wrong?" he yelled, fumbling for the light switch. The room was flooded with light. "The window!" I shrieked, pointing a shaking finger. "There's a man at the window!" My dad rushed to the window and threw the curtain wide open. He peered out into the darkness. "There's no one there, honey," he said, his voice laced with confusion. I crawled over to the window and looked. He was right. The yard was empty. The face was gone. It had vanished as if it had never been there. The police came. I told them everything, my voice trembling, tears streaming down my face. They were kind, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. They searched the yard with their heavy flashlights. They found nothing. No footprints on the soft grass. No disturbance in the flower bed beneath my window. No evidence at all. "It was probably a nightmare, miss," one of the officers said gently. "A very vivid one." "It wasn't a dream," I insisted, my voice rising with hysteria. "He was there. I saw him." They left, and my parents tried to comfort me. My dad nailed my window shut. My mom sat with me until I cried myself into an exhausted, dreamless sleep on the couch in the living room. The next morning, the world felt gray and unreal. My parents treated me with a gentle, worried caution, as if I were a fragile thing that might break. I knew they didn't believe me. They thought I was stressed, overtired, that my mind had played a cruel trick on me. I started to doubt myself. Had it been a dream? A hypnagogic hallucination, as my dad, a fan of medical dramas, suggested? That afternoon, my dad was doing some yard work. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly out the window when he called me outside. His voice was strange, tight. "Claire, come look at this." I went out. He was standing by the side of the house, right below my bedroom window. He was pointing at the flower bed. In the soft dirt, hidden beneath the leaves of a hosta plant, was a single deep footprint. It was from a large, heavy boot. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. Next to the footprint, half buried in the dirt, was a small, smudged object. It was a single unlit cigarette. My dad doesn't smoke. I don't smoke. No one who had been in our yard smoked. It was proof. Proof that someone had stood there, watching, waiting. We never found out who he was. The police increased patrols for a while, but nothing ever came of it. We installed a security system, motion-activated floodlights, cameras. My room was no longer my own. It was a fortress, but I felt like a prisoner, not a princess. I spent the rest of the summer sleeping on an air mattress in my parents' room. I went back to college in the fall to a dorm room on the 7th floor. I thought the distance, the height, would make me feel safe. It didn't. It's been years. I live in a city now, in an apartment so high up the world below is just a map of glittering lights. I never sleep with the curtains open. I still have nightmares about that smiling face. It's a permanent image burned onto the back of my eyelids. I don't know what he wanted. Maybe it was just the fear. Maybe he was a hunter who didn't need to capture his prey, only to corner it and see the terror in its eyes. He didn't break into my house. He didn't need to. He broke into my mind, into my sense of safety, and he has lived there ever since. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I hear it. A faint rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. I know it's just the building settling or the rain on the glass, I know that. But I still lie awake for hours, my heart pounding, staring at the window, terrified that if I dare to look, I'll see a pale, smiling face pressed against the glass 20 stories up. The first thing I noticed was the cold. A deep, unnatural chill had settled in the house, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes the hair on your arms stand up. I opened my eyes to the gray, pre-dawn light filtering through my bedroom window. It was 5:15 a.m. My alarm wasn't set to go off for another hour. I sat up, shivering, and that's when I heard it. Silence. Not the usual comfortable silence of my small, isolated house, but a dead, empty quiet. There was no gentle thump-thump of my dog's tail against the floorboards outside my door. There was no soft snuffling or the occasional jingle of his collar as he shifted in his sleep. My dog, a German Shepherd mix named Buster, was my shadow, my protector, and my personal alarm system. He was a rescue, and his early life had left him with a deep-seated anxiety that manifested as hypervigilance. A leaf blowing across the porch, a car door slamming 3 houses down, a squirrel chattering in the yard, Buster barked at everything. He was the reason I, a woman living alone in a house bordered by dense woods, slept so soundly. His barking was the soundtrack to my safety. His silence was a scream. I threw the covers off and walked to my bedroom door. "Buster," I called out, my voice a little shaky. "Hey, buddy." Nothing. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. His dog bed, a large plush cushion he loved, was vacant. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I walked down the hall, the cold air growing more intense as I approached the kitchen. "Buster," I called again, my voice louder this time. The scene that greeted me in the kitchen made me freeze. The back door, the one I always triple-checked before bed, was wide open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. The contents of the kitchen drawers were strewn across the floor. Cutlery, utensils, dish towels. The cupboard doors hung open and a bag of flour had been overturned, dusting the linoleum in a fine white powder like a macabre snowfall. It was a burglary, a clean, obvious break-in. My mind struggled to process the violation, the sheer audacity of someone entering my home while I slept. But a more urgent, terrifying question drowned out everything else. Where was Buster? My eyes darted around the chaotic room and I saw him. He was lying in the corner near his food and water bowls, unnaturally still. For a horrifying second, I thought he was dead. "Buster!" I cried, rushing to his side. I dropped to my knees beside him. He was breathing, thank God, but it was a shallow, labored breath. He was completely limp, his eyes closed, unresponsive to my voice or my touch. He was alive, but he was gone from me, lost in some deep, unnatural sleep. My panic gave way to a chilling confusion. A burglar breaks in, and my guard dog, my fierce protector who once cornered a mailman for stepping on the lawn, does nothing. He doesn't bark. He doesn't attack. It made no sense. Then I saw his food bowl. It wasn't empty, as it should have been after his dinner. Inside, nestled amongst the last few pieces of his kibble, were several chunks of raw red meat. I never gave Buster raw meat. I certainly never gave him table scraps. This wasn't from me. My blood ran cold. The truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. The intruder hadn't just gotten past my dog. They had planned for him. They had come prepared. They had fed him, lacing the meat with something to drug him, to silence him, to neutralize the only defense I had. The violation felt deeper now, more personal. This wasn't just a random break-in, this was calculated. Someone had watched my house. They knew I had a dog. They knew how to pacify him. They had stood in my kitchen in the dark and patiently waited for the drugs to take hold, waited for my guardian to fall before they began their work. All while I slept, safe in my ignorant bliss, just one room away. With trembling hands, I called my vet's emergency line. I explained the situation, my voice cracking with fear and rage. The vet told me to bring him in immediately. I wrapped Buster in a heavy blanket. He felt like dead weight, and somehow managed to carry him to my car. As I drove, my mind replayed the scene in the kitchen, and a new, even more terrifying thought began to form. What were they looking for? The ransacking was strange. My laptop was still on the kitchen table. My purse with my wallet and keys was untouched on the counter. The small TV in the living room was still there. They had ignored the obvious valuables. They had gone through my drawers, my cupboards, but what for? It felt less like a robbery and more like a search, a frantic, desperate search for something specific. After dropping Buster at the vet, who confirmed he had been heavily sedated but would likely recover, I called the police. 2 officers arrived at my house. I walked them through the scene, the open door, the ransacked kitchen, the drugged dog. They were professional, but I could see a familiar weariness in their eyes. "Do you have any idea what they might have been looking for, ma'am?" one of them asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I can't think of anything. I don't keep cash in the house. The only valuable jewelry I have, I'm wearing." They took fingerprints, which they warned would likely lead nowhere. They took my statement. They asked if I had any enemies, if I was involved in any disputes. My life was painfully ordinary. A freelance graphic designer who worked from home. A quiet, unremarkable existence. There was no one. "It's the dog that gets me," the older officer said, looking at the empty food bowl. "This is professional. Most burglars are opportunistic. They see an open window, they take what they can and run. This is different. This is planned." His words did nothing to soothe me. They only confirmed the cold dread that had taken root in my soul. When the police left, I was alone again in my violated home. I cleaned up the mess, scrubbing the flour from the floor, putting the utensils back in their drawers, trying to restore a sense of order that I knew was a lie. Every creak of the house made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden figure. The silence, once a comfort, was now a threat. It was the silence of my dog, a silence that meant I was unprotected, vulnerable. Buster came home the next day, groggy and weak, but alive. He clung to my side, a low whimper constantly in his throat. He was traumatized, his trust in the world and perhaps in his own ability to protect it shattered. We were two broken souls in a broken home. I didn't sleep for the next 3 nights. I sat in a chair in the living room, a baseball bat in my lap, watching the back door. I replayed that night over and over in my head. The silence, the cold, the meat in the bowl. The most terrifying part was the intimacy of it. The intruder had been so close. They had stood in my kitchen, a space I thought of as the heart of my home, and had committed this quiet, deliberate act of cruelty against my dog. They had moved through my house while I slept, their breath mingling with the air I breathed. On the 4th day, driven by a desperate need for answers, I started my own investigation. The police had found nothing. It was up to me. I tried to think. If it wasn't a random robbery, then it had to be personal. But who? And what were they looking for? I went through everything in my house, trying to see it through the eyes of a stranger. What could possibly be valuable enough to warrant such a planned intrusion? My mind kept coming up empty. A week later, a letter arrived. It was a standard business-sized envelope with no return address. My name and address were printed in a generic computer-generated font. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it were 5 words, also printed. I know you have it. There was nothing else. No signature, no demand. Just that cold, cryptic message. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. Have what? The letter confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't over. The search had been unsuccessful, and they thought I was hiding something from them. I took the letter to the police. They were sympathetic, but admitted there wasn't much they could do. It wasn't a direct threat. It could be a prank, a mistake. But I knew it wasn't. It was a second knock on the door, a reminder that they were still out there, watching. The paranoia became a suffocating blanket. I installed a state-of-the-art security system with cameras covering every inch of my property. I reinforced the doors and windows, but these were just physical barriers. The psychological damage was done. I felt like a prisoner in my own home, constantly watching the monitors, scrutinizing every shadow, every flicker of movement. My life became a hunt for a secret I didn't even know I possessed. I tore my own house apart far more thoroughly than the intruder had. I went through old boxes in the attic, files from previous jobs, letters from ex-boyfriends. I searched for anything, a document, an object, a piece of information that could be what they were looking for. I found nothing. The lack of answers was its own form of madness. Was I the target? Or was it the previous owner of the house? I had bought the house in an estate sale 2 years ago after the elderly owner, a recluse named Mr. Abernathy, had passed away. I knew almost nothing about him. Could he have hidden something here? I spent weeks digging into Mr. Abernathy's life, searching public records, old news articles. He was a retired watchmaker, a quiet man with no family. There was nothing to suggest he was involved in anything that would lead to a secret worth hunting for. The break-in was 3 months ago. There have been no more letters, no more nightly visitors that I know of. But the silence remains. Buster still rarely barks. He's a different dog now, more timid, more anxious. His silence is a constant living reminder of that night. I live in a state of permanent vigilance. I don't know who they are, what they were looking for, or if they'll be back. I don't know if they finally realized I don't have what they want, or if they are just being patient, waiting for me to let my guard down again. The most terrifying part of this whole ordeal isn't the broken-in door or the ransacked kitchen. It's the poisoned meat in the dog bowl. It's the thought of a stranger standing in the dark, so close, so confident, methodically dismantling my security, my peace of mind, one drugged piece of meat at a time. He didn't just silence my dog. He silenced my life, and I know deep in my bones that some secrets don't stay buried, and some hunters never ever give up the search. I just pray that when he comes back, I hear him this time. Every house has a voice. If you live in one long enough, you learn its language. You learn the sigh of the floorboards in the summer heat, the groan of the pipes on a cold winter night, the rattle of a window frame in a strong wind. Our house, a sprawling 2-story colonial we'd bought for a steal, had a voice too. But it also had a whisper, a secret language that came from below, from the dark, damp, and perpetually ignored basement. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 kids, 10-year-old Leo and 7-year-old Mia, had lived in the house for just over a year. The basement was a relic, a place out of time. It was a labyrinth of stone walls, ancient support beams, and a chaotic web of pipes that snaked across the low ceiling. It was unfinished, musty, and cold. We used it for nothing more than storage, a place to exile old furniture and holiday decorations. We'd go down there maybe twice a year, and each time we'd leave a little more quickly than the last. The place just felt wrong. The noises started subtly. At first, it was a faint metallic clank in the middle of the night. I'd be lying in bed and hear it resonate up through the floor. "Did you hear that?" I'd whisper to Sarah. "Just the pipes, Mark," she'd murmur, already half asleep. "It's an old house. The heat's kicking on." It was a logical explanation. The boiler was a monstrous ancient thing that looked like it belonged in a factory. It made all sorts of strange noises, so I accepted it. The house was just talking its strange old language, but the sounds began to change. They became less mechanical and more organic. There was a soft dragging sound, like a heavy sack being pulled across the concrete floor. There were faint rhythmic thumps. Sometimes, if the house was completely silent, I'd hear what sounded like a low, guttural cough. The kids heard it too. "Daddy, the basement monster is hungry," Mia said one night at dinner. Leo, ever the brave older brother, scoffed. "There are no monsters, Mia. It's just the water heater." But later that night, I saw Leo standing at the top of the basement stairs, his ear pressed against the heavy wooden door, his face pale. He didn't know I was watching. I knew I should go down and investigate. A part of me, the rational, responsible homeowner part, told me to march down there and find the source of the noise. But another part, a more primal, instinctual part, held me back. The door to the basement felt like a seal on a tomb. I had a visceral, irrational fear of breaking that seal, of finding out what was really making those sounds in the dark. It was easier to believe the lie. It was just the pipes. It had to be. The incidents grew stranger. We started noticing things were missing. Not valuables, but small, almost insignificant items. A can of soup from the pantry shelf. An old wool blanket from the linen closet. A hammer from my toolbox in the garage. We'd blame each other, or our own forgetfulness. "Are you sure you didn't move it?" became a common refrain in our house. We were a family living under a low-grade collective gaslighting, desperately clinging to normalcy. The real turning point came on a frigid night in late October. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like a caged beast. We were all huddled in the living room watching a movie, the warmth of the fireplace a welcome comfort. Suddenly, the entire house was plunged into darkness. The TV went black, the lamps died, and the roar of the wind was the only sound left. A power outage. "Okay, nobody panic," I said, my voice sounding a little too loud in the sudden silence. "I'll go check the breaker box, probably just a tripped fuse." And my heart sank. I knew where the breaker box was. It was in the basement. "I'll come with you," Sarah said, her voice tight with an anxiety that mirrored my own. "No, stay here with the kids," I said, trying to sound brave. "I'll just be a minute." I grabbed the heavy-duty flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Its beam felt pitifully small as it cut through the oppressive darkness of the house. I walked to the basement door, my footsteps echoing unnaturally. I placed my hand on the cold brass knob and hesitated. From below, I could hear a faint, rhythmic sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It's just the wind blowing something against the foundation, I told myself. My hand trembled as I turned the knob. The door swung open with a low groan, releasing a wave of cold, musty air that smelled of damp earth and something else. Something vaguely metallic and unpleasant like old blood. I pointed the flashlight down the steep wooden stairs. They disappeared into a blackness so absolute it felt like it could swallow the light. "Mark, is everything okay?" Sarah's voice called from the living room. "Yeah, fine, just heading down," I called back, my voice betraying a tremor I hoped she didn't notice. I took the first step. The wood creaked under my weight. Each step down was a descent into another world, a world that operated by different rules. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the scrape, scrape, scrape that was getting louder. I reached the concrete floor. The basement was vast and filled with monstrous shadows cast by my flashlight. Old furniture draped in white sheets looked like a congregation of ghosts. Stacks of boxes loomed like crumbling monoliths. The scraping sound was coming from the far corner of the basement, the darkest, most cluttered section near the old stone foundation. My objective was the breaker box, which was on the wall to my left, but my eyes and my feet were drawn toward the sound. I had to know. I had to see what the pipes looked like when they were making that noise. I moved slowly, weaving through the maze of forgotten things. The scraping stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. I froze, sweeping, the flashlight beam across the room. Nothing, just shadows and dust. I told myself I was being an idiot. I turned toward the breaker box. It was an old metal panel rusted at the hinges. I pulled it open and shone the light inside. A row of black switches, one of them, the main, was flipped down. Simple enough. I reached out to flip it back up, but a sound from behind me made me freeze. A soft, wet cough. It was close. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. I swept the flashlight beam across the far corner, the place where the scraping had been. The light landed on a pile of old discarded tarps and cardboard, heaped against the stone wall. And I saw a pair of eyes. They were pale, reflecting the light with a sickly, animalistic glow. They were attached to a face, a gaunt, skeletal face covered in grime and shadow. The face was attached to a body, a wretched, emaciated figure crouched in the corner, half hidden behind the pile of junk. It was a man. He was sitting on the floor, his knees pulled up to his chest. In his lap was a rusty piece of metal, which he had clearly been scraping against the stone floor. He was wearing layers of tattered clothing, some of which I vaguely recognized. An old flannel shirt of mine, a moth-eaten sweater that had belonged to Sarah's father. Around him were the spoils of his secret life. Empty soup cans, a dirty pillow, the old wool blanket from our linen closet. Time stopped. My brain simply refused to compute the scene. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a monster. This was a man. A man who had been living in my basement. The noises, the missing food, the strange smells, it all crashed down on me in a single horrifying wave of understanding. He didn't move. He just stared at me, his pale eyes wide with what looked like fear. He was cornered. He was a rat I had found in its nest. I should have screamed, I should have run, but I was paralyzed, locked in a silent standoff with the secret my house had been keeping. I could see him more clearly now. He was old, his face a road map of wrinkles and dirt. A long matted beard covered the lower half of his face. He looked like a castaway, a man who had been shipwrecked in the dungeon of my home. I finally found my voice, a strangled, hoarse whisper. "Who are you?" He flinched at the sound, pressing himself further back against the cold stone wall. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, just a dry, rasping click. He looked terrified, not of me, but of being seen, of his hidden world being exposed to the light. The spell broke. The instinct for self-preservation, for protecting my family, finally kicked in. I took a step backward, never taking the flashlight beam off him. "Don't move," I stammered, though the command was more for my own benefit than his. I turned and ran. I scrambled up the wooden stairs, not daring to look back, expecting at any moment to feel his hand grab my ankle. I burst through the basement door, slammed it shut, and fumbled with the bolt, locking it tight. "Mark! Oh my God, you're white as a sheet. What happened?" Sarah was standing there, her face etched with worry. "There's someone in the basement," I gasped, leaning against the door, my body shaking uncontrollably. "There's a man living in our basement." The rest of the night was a blur of flashing blue and red lights. The police came. They were skeptical at first, but the terror in my voice was convincing. 2 officers, guns drawn, descended into the basement while we waited upstairs, huddled together in the living room. The call came from the officer's radio a few minutes later. "Basement is clear." I couldn't believe it. I went down with them. The man was gone. His nest of blankets and stolen goods was still there, a pathetic monument to his secret existence, but he had vanished. In the corner where he had been crouching, the police found a small, crudely dug out section of the stone foundation leading to a narrow, dark tunnel. It was an old, forgotten access way to the sewer system, sealed up from the outside decades ago. But he had clearly clawed it open from the inside. He had an escape route. He had always had one. We never found out who he was. The police searched the sewer tunnels, but it was a hopeless task. He was a ghost, a phantom who had made his home in the darkness beneath our feet. We sealed the tunnel with concrete. We had the basement professionally cleaned and brightly lit. We put a heavy new steel door at the top of the stairs, but it didn't matter. The house was no longer ours. Its voice was no longer just the creak of old wood. It was now tainted with the memory of his whispers, his coughs, his scraping. We had been living a lie, a comfortable illusion of safety, while a stranger coexisted with us, separated only by a layer of floorboards. He had listened to our family dinners, our arguments, our laughter. He had heard our children playing. He had been a silent, unseen member of our family. We sold the house 6 months later. We couldn't stay. Every time the power flickered, every time I heard a strange noise from the pipes, the image of those pale, terrified eyes staring back at me from the darkness would flash in my mind. I don't know what was more terrifying, the discovery of the man in my basement, or the profound, soul-crushing loneliness he must have felt to choose a life in the dark, damp earth beneath a family of strangers. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man. And that somehow is the most horrifying part of all. He was real. And for a year, the house below was his home, not ours. In the digital age, we curate our lives for an audience. We build walls of privacy settings and friend lists, believing we are in control of who gets to look in. We post pictures of our triumphs, our vacations, our smiling faces, and we feel safe in the curated illusion. But the walls are thinner than we think, and sometimes the audience is closer than we could ever imagine. My name is Anna, and I was a creature of habit and solitude. I lived alone in a small second-floor apartment in a quiet, older building. My life was a comfortable loop: work at a local library, evenings with a book and a cup of tea, and the mindless, soothing scroll through social media before bed. Facebook was my window to a world I mostly preferred to keep at a distance, a place to see college friends get married, watch cousins' kids grow up, and feel connected without the messy complication of actual contact. My profile was locked down tight, private, friends only. I was careful. The friend request came on a Wednesday night just after 11. I was in bed, the glow of my phone screen the only light in the room. The name was generic, John Smith. No mutual friends. I was about to hit delete without a second thought. I never accepted requests from strangers. But then I saw the profile picture, and my world tilted on its axis. It was a picture of my bedroom. My blood went cold. It wasn't an old picture, it wasn't a stock photo, it was my bedroom exactly as it was in that very moment. The book I was reading lay on the nightstand, the specific pattern of my crumpled duvet. The glass of water I had just set down, with condensation beading on its side. It was a photo taken from outside, through my window, looking in. It had been taken seconds ago. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. My first instinct was to scramble out of bed to hide. But I was frozen, my eyes glued to the tiny, terrifying image on my phone. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. A prank? A hack? But the detail, the condensation on the glass, it was too real. He was out there, right now. Standing in the darkness of the alleyway behind my building, looking up at my window at me. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone. I clicked on the profile. It was new, created that same day. There were no other posts, no other photos, no information, just that single horrifying picture and the generic name. I didn't scream. I didn't run. A strange, cold calm washed over me, the kind that comes when your brain is trying to protect you from a terror it can't fully process. I slid out of bed, my movements slow and deliberate, and crawled on my hands and knees to the window. I stayed below the sill, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to see. I peered over the edge just enough to see the alley below. It was empty. The single flickering streetlight cast long, distorted shadows, but there was no one there. No figure in a dark hoodie, no man holding a phone. Just an empty, silent alley. Had I imagined it? Had he seen me move and hidden? Or was he so good at melting into the shadows that he was invisible? I crawled away from the window, my back pressed against the wall, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I deleted the friend request. I blocked the profile. I felt a surge of digital power, a pathetic attempt to exert control over a situation that was terrifyingly physical. Blocking him on Facebook wouldn't stop him from standing in the alley. Then my phone buzzed again. A new friend request. The name was different, David Jones. But the profile picture was the same, my bedroom. I blocked that one too. A minute later, another one. Michael Brown, same picture. He was toying with me. He wasn't just watching, he was announcing it. He was waving from the darkness, letting me know that my walls, both digital and physical, were meaningless to him. I finally did what I should have done first. I called the police. An officer came, a kind but weary-looking man who had clearly seen his share of late-night hysterics. I explained the situation, my voice trembling as I showed him the screenshot I had taken of the first request. He listened patiently. "Ma'am, are you sure it wasn't just a prank from someone you know? Or maybe an old photo?" "Look at the book," I insisted, my voice rising. "Look at the glass of water. I took that picture myself right before I called you." I showed him the photo on my phone's camera roll to prove the timestamp. He shone his flashlight into the alley from my window. He went downstairs and did a walk around of the building. He found nothing. No footprints in the gravel. No one lurking in the shadows. "There's not much we can do without a suspect, ma'am," he said, his tone sympathetic but dismissive. "It's probably just some kid trying to spook you. Just keep your curtains closed. I'll file a report." Keep my curtains closed. That was the solution. To live in a self-imposed box, to shut out the world because someone was trying to break in. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor in my living room, far away from any windows, with every light in the apartment on. Every creak of the building, every distant siren sent a fresh jolt of terror through me. The friend requests had stopped, but that brought no comfort. The silence was worse. It meant he was just watching without announcing himself. The next few days were a living nightmare. I felt exposed, violated. The feeling of being watched was a constant physical weight on my shoulders. I'd be at work, shelving books, and I'd feel a prickling on my neck, convinced I could see a familiar shadowy figure at the far end of the aisle. I'd be walking home and feel eyes on my back, but when I'd turn around, there was no one there. He had invaded not just my home, but my mind. I became obsessed with my digital footprint. I deactivated my Facebook account. I made my Instagram private. I Googled myself, terrified of what personal information might be floating in the ether. I was trying to become a ghost, to erase myself from the world he was watching. A week passed with no new incidents, no friend requests, no strange feelings. A fragile sense of normalcy began to return. I told myself the officer was right. It was a kid, a prankster who had gotten bored and moved on. I started to breathe again. I even dared to open my curtains during the day. The package arrived on a Saturday. It was a small brown cardboard box left outside my apartment door. There was no shipping label, no return address. Just my name and apartment number written in neat block letters. My hands shook as I carried it inside. I shouldn't have opened it. I should have called the police, but I had to know. Inside, nestled in a bed of tissue paper, was a single object. A small, intricately carved wooden bird. I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. It was identical to the one my grandmother had given me when I was a child. It had sat on my dresser for years until it was lost during a move a decade ago. I had been heartbroken. I had never posted a picture of it online. I had never mentioned it to anyone in years. There was no way anyone could have known about it, unless they had been watching me for a very, very long time. Tucked under the bird was a small folded note. My fingers trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a threat. It was a question printed in the same generic font as the letter on the box. Did you miss this? This was the moment I broke. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a random stalker. This was someone who knew me. Someone who had access to the intimate, forgotten details of my life. The fear was no longer just about being watched. It was about being known. I took the box and the note to the police. This time they took it more seriously. The specificity of the gift was deeply disturbing. They dusted the box for prints but found nothing. They opened a formal stalking investigation. But with no suspect and no direct threats, their hands were tied. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. Every corner held a memory of his unseen presence. The window was a gaping wound. I broke my lease, paid the penalty, and moved in with my sister across town. Her apartment was in a secure building with a doorman, a place of anonymous concrete safety. For a while, it worked. The constant feeling of being watched began to fade. I started sleeping through the night again. I started to believe I had escaped. The final act came 2 months later. I was starting to rebuild my life. I had even reactivated my Facebook account, keeping my friend list to a small, trusted circle. I was determined not to let him win, not to let him chase me out of my own life. One evening, my sister was showing me photos from her recent vacation. She had tagged me in an album. I clicked on the notification. As I was looking through the pictures of sunny beaches and smiling faces, another notification popped up at the top of my screen. You have a new memory on Facebook. I clicked on it out of habit. Facebook's algorithm was always digging up old posts, old photos. But this wasn't an old memory. It was a post from 1 year ago on this exact date. It was a post I had never made. The post was a single photo. It was a picture of me sleeping in my bed in my old apartment. It was taken from inside the room, from the foot of my bed. I was vulnerable, peaceful, completely unaware. The caption beneath the photo was simple. She looks so peaceful when she sleeps. The post was credited to me. It said I had posted it a year ago, but I hadn't, and the privacy setting wasn't friends only. It was only me. He had been in my account. He had been in my room. He had created a memory for me, a digital time bomb set to go off a year later. A final devastating message to let me know that he could get closer than I ever dreamed possible. He wasn't just outside the window. He had been inside all along. I haven't been on social media since. The police were never able to trace the hack. They never identified the man. He was and is a ghost who knows the name of my childhood pet, the title of the book on my nightstand, and the look on my face when I sleep. I don't know who he is or what he wants. Maybe he's moved on to someone else. Or maybe he's just waiting patiently for the day I feel safe again. The truth is, the physical intrusion was only the beginning. The real violation was the theft of my past and the poisoning of my future. He proved that no matter how many locks you put on your doors, no matter how high your privacy settings are, you are never truly safe. The walls are made of glass, and someone is always watching. It would begin in silence, in the familiar landscape of my own bedroom. I'd be aware that I was in bed, but I couldn't move. It wasn't the frightening, crushing paralysis of sleep paralysis. It was more like I was a passive observer in my own body, a spectator to the scene about to unfold. The room would be cast in the pale, sickly light of a street lamp filtering through the thin curtains, a light that made familiar shapes seem alien and menacing. And then I would see him. He would be standing in the far corner of the room near the old oak wardrobe, a space that was always steeped in the deepest shadow. He was just a shape at first, a tall, slender silhouette that was darker than the darkness around it. He never moved. He never made a sound. He just stood there watching me. In the dream, my primary emotion wasn't terror, but an overwhelming, suffocating sense of wrongness. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was a tear in the fabric of my reality, a glitch in the code of my sanctuary. I would lie there, pinned by his unseen gaze, my dream self's heart pounding a frantic, silent rhythm against my ribs. I would try to scream, but my throat would be sealed shut. I would try to look away, but my eyes would be locked on the shape in the corner. The worst part was the waiting. I would lie there for what felt like hours, waiting for him to move, to speak, to do something. But he never did. He just watched. And then, just as the tension became unbearable, I would wake up. I'd sit bolt upright in bed, gasping for air, my body drenched in a cold sweat. The room would be empty. The corner by the wardrobe would hold nothing but shadows. My heart would be racing, but the oppressive sense of wrongness would be gone, replaced by the clean, sharp relief of waking. It was just a dream, a recurring nightmare brought on by stress, I told myself. I was a 28-year-old architect, living alone in a city apartment for the first time, juggling demanding clients and impossible deadlines. Of course, I was having nightmares. I had a routine after the dream. I'd get out of bed, my legs shaky, and walk through my small one-bedroom apartment. I'd check the front door, confirming the deadbolt was still locked. I'd check the latch on the single window in the living room. Everything was always secure. Then I'd go to my bedroom door. I had a habit born of a childhood fear of the dark, of always sleeping with my bedroom door closed and locked. It was a simple slide bolt, more symbolic than secure, but the ritual of locking it each night was a comfort. I would check the bolt. It was always firmly in place, secure, safe. It was just a dream. I'd get a glass of water, my breathing would return to normal, and I'd eventually manage to fall back asleep. This cycle continued for about 2 weeks. The dream would come every 2 or 3 nights, always identical, always ending in the same heart-pounding relief. I started to get used to it, to anticipate it. It became a familiar monster. The change came on a Thursday night. The dream began as it always did. The silence, the paralysis, the pale light. I saw the shape detach itself from the shadows in the corner. But this time, something was different. The sense of wrongness was heavier, more suffocating. The air in the dream felt thick, charged with a new, more potent dread. The shape in the corner moved. It was a slow, almost imperceptible shift at first. A slight tilt of what I presumed was its head. Then it took a step. It didn't make a sound. The floorboards didn't creak. It just glided out of the corner, a column of pure blackness moving through the gray room. It moved toward the foot of my bed. In the dream, a scream was building in my chest, a silent, desperate shriek. The figure stopped at the edge of my bed. It was so close now, I still couldn't see a face, no features, just a void in the shape of a man. It stood there for a moment, and then it began to lean over me. It leaned slowly, agonizingly, its formless head descending toward my face. I could feel a coldness radiating from it, a chilling aura that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was the cold of the grave. It was the cold of absolute emptiness. Its head came closer and closer, and I knew, with a certainty that transcended dream logic, that if it touched me, I would die. I would simply cease to exist. I woke up with a scream lodged in my throat, a raw, guttural sound that tore through the silence of my apartment. I was sitting bolt upright, my body trembling violently, my eyes wide with a terror that was more profound than anything I had ever felt before. The room was empty. The corner was just a corner. The first rays of dawn were beginning to paint the sky outside my window. It was over. It was just a dream. The most vivid, terrifying dream of my life, but a dream nonetheless. I swung my legs out of bed, my whole body shaking. I needed to go through my routine. I needed the comfort of the locked doors, the tangible proof of my safety. I stumbled out of my bedroom and into the small hallway, heading for the front door. My hand reached out for the deadbolt. It was locked. I checked the window latch. Secure. I let out a long, shuddering sigh of relief. My heart rate began to slow. It was all in my head, a stress-induced nightmare of epic proportions. I turned back toward my bedroom, a weak, shaky smile on my face. I was safe. And then I saw it. My bedroom door was open. It was just a crack, maybe 6 inches, but it was open. I froze, my hand still on the living room wall. The smile vanished from my face. My blood turned to ice. That wasn't possible. I remembered with absolute, unshakable clarity, closing it and sliding the bolt before I went to bed. It was an ingrained, muscle memory ritual I had performed every single night for years. I never forgot. Ever. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A draft? No, the window was locked. Did I get up in the middle of the night and forget? Did I unlock it in my sleep? My brain was a whirlwind of desperate, flimsy possibilities, each one collapsing under the weight of one terrible, unassailable fact. The door was open. I stood there for what felt like a lifetime, staring at that 6-inch gap of darkness. The silence of the apartment was no longer comforting. It was predatory. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting. Slowly, as if moving through water, I forced myself to walk back to the bedroom door. My hand trembled as I reached out and pushed it open wider. I flicked on the light switch. The room was exactly as I had left it. The bed was a mess of tangled sheets from my frantic awakening. The book was on the nightstand. The corner by the wardrobe was empty. Everything was normal, except for the bolt. I looked at the simple brass slide bolt on the door. It was in the unlocked position, slid all the way back into its housing. I stared at it, a new, more insidious fear beginning to creep in. A slide bolt doesn't just open on its own. It requires a physical action. It has to be pulled back. From which side? The thought was a spark in the kindling of my panic. The bolt could only be operated from inside the room. The implications of that settled on me, heavy and suffocating. If I had locked the door from the inside and it was now unlocked, that meant one of two things. Either I had unlocked it myself in some sleepwalking fugue state, a possibility I desperately wanted to believe, or someone else had been in the room with me. Someone who had waited for me to fall asleep, unlocked the door from the inside, and then left. My eyes darted back to the corner by the wardrobe. The shape. The dream. It wasn't a dream. The realization was not a sudden crash, but a slow, creeping dawn of absolute horror. The paralysis. The feeling of being watched. The figure in the corner. It wasn't my subconscious mind playing tricks on me. It was my mind's interpretation of a horrifying reality it couldn't otherwise process. I hadn't been dreaming that a man was in my room. I had been aware of it on some primal, helpless level while I was asleep. The dream hadn't been a nightmare I was waking up from. It had been a window into what was happening to me while I was unconscious. The figure leaning over me. That was the moment he had reached for the bolt on the door, his form eclipsing my view. The scream that woke me. That was my subconscious finally breaking through, screaming at the real physical violation that was taking place. I backed away from the room, my body shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed my phone and my keys and I ran. I didn't pack a bag, I didn't even put on shoes. I ran out of my apartment and didn't stop running until I was sitting in the 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, surrounded by light and noise and people. I never spent another night in that apartment. I called my landlord from the diner, told him I was breaking my lease, that I would pay whatever penalty was required. I couldn't explain the real reason, how could I? That I believed a man was somehow getting into my locked apartment, hiding in my bedroom until I fell asleep, watching me for hours and then letting himself out. It sounded like the ravings of a lunatic. I had my brother come with me the next day to pack my things. We moved through the apartment with a tense, fearful energy. We searched every closet, every corner. We found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no hidden passages, nothing out of place except for a single long, dark hair on the pillow next to where I slept, a hair that was not mine. I don't know how he got in. I don't know how long it had been happening. Had he been there every time I had the dream? Had he been the source of every creak and groan I had attributed to the old building? The thought is a cancer in my mind. It's been years. I live in a new city now with a new job. I live with a roommate. I never ever sleep with my bedroom door closed. I need to be able to see out. I need to know that nothing is hiding in the corners. But the fear is a part of me now. It's a shadow that follows me. The most terrifying thing is the uncertainty. I have no proof other than an open door and a single hair. I have only the memory of a dream that was not a dream. Sometimes I wonder if I really am crazy, if my mind simply cracked under the pressure of a new life. But then I remember the feeling of his gaze, the coldness that radiated from his shape, and the absolute soul-deep certainty I felt in that moment. The wrongness of his presence. He didn't steal anything. He didn't harm me physically. He just came into my room, into my sanctuary, and he watched me. He took nothing but my sense of safety, but he took it so completely that I know I will never get it back. He taught me that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones that attack you. They're the ones that prove they can stand beside you while you sleep and you will never even know they're there.